Sounds good. Good morning. Included in your packet are the February and March financials. The February financials did go, were included in the April board packet. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the March financials, which will be inclusive of the February information. On the statement of revenue and expenditures, we have revenue of 93 million as compared to last year of 86 million. So it's an increase of about 6.6 million or 7 million. And of course, our two primary are property taxes and investment income. So both of those have increased over the prior year. Our administrative expenditures are 4.7 million as of the end of March. That's just a small increase over the prior year. And our program expenditures are at 34 million. The next graph in the financials, the next page in the financials are the graphs. The top two graphs are comparison of fiscal year 24 to 23 for both revenue and expenditures. And the bottom graph is budget to actuals for each of the chiefs groups. And as you can see, each of the groups are all under budget. The next page are our contracts and budget amendments. In March, we had no contract signed, but we did have one budget amendment. And the last page of the report is our investments. And as of March 31st, we had 106 million in our investment accounts. And in March, we received $480,000 in interest income. And interest income has been, quite well for us these past couple of years. Year to date, we've received 2.4 million. Our budget is at 2.5 million, so we're at March, so we know that we'll definitely exceed that budgeted amount. And that's all for the financials. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I guess we can move on to the next. We don't have anything to vote on this, so it's a matter of just information. So let's move then on to the 5-year forecast and funding parameters. Diana?
Good morning, Diana Caro, Senior Manager, Budget and Business Services, and Beth and I will be co-presenting this today. We've got a presentation, which typically we've provided this in a memo, but we're going to spend a little bit more time on it this year because we've added some new information to the forecast that we just wanted to walk you through before we get your input. So next slide. So the purpose of this agenda item today is just for us to receive guidance from the Finance Committee on the key funding parameters that staff are recommending to use to determine the fiscal year 25 program allocation amounts. Of course, pending adoption of the fiscal year 25 budget, because those anticipated allocation amounts they get communicated to the agencies on May 3rd, which is coming up. And then we also use the guidance that we received today to prepare the preliminary fiscal year 25 budget and forecast that will be presented to the board in June. Next slide. So the purpose of having the 5-year forecast is to understand the impact of today's decisions on future budgets and long-term fund balance, and to strategically and proactively identify and address any potential long-term imbalances in our financial position. Of course, forecasts are built on assumptions. They're never going to be 100% accurate, but the point is to lay out what we think is most likely to occur, and then, of course, providing time to plan and adjust so that the programs and services we're investing in can maintain a sense of stability. And then more specifically, we're following board policy, which requires staff to maintain a 5-year financial plan that forecasts both revenues and expenditures. So this slide is a high-level overview of the fiscal year 25 budget development timeline. The detailed budget calendar was brought to the Finance Committee last month. And at this time, I'll just focus on the points in time we're bringing the budget back to the Finance Committee, which is the orange-colored text. And as you can see at this stage, we're early in the budget process. Much of what we're going to provide to you today, there are still estimates and assumptions. But when we come back on June 27th, we'll provide you with a detailed budget and updated forecast. And then we come back a final time in August at the tail end of the process with what should be a minimal number of changes that have occurred since the June 27th meeting. All right, so what you have before you today are two different forecast scenarios. You have them in this large print at your seat because you'll never be able to see it on the screen. And also that you can reference them throughout the presentation if you need to. So the first scenario is based on us returning to last year's millage rate of 0.8508 in fiscal year '25. And we included this scenario because we were last with the Finance Committee in June 2023. This was the direction that we had received, was to assume that we could only reduce the millage rate for 1 year to help spend down fund balance before we would need to return it to the prior rate in order to have sufficient funding to complete the implementation of the current strategic plan and the next strategic plan. The second scenario assumes that we're going to maintain our current millage rate of 0.8250 for another year, so in essence hold it flat. And this is because since we were here last, the property value projections have been updated, and the table on the slide shows that while the projection for fiscal year '25 has decreased from 5.9% to 5.5%, the projections for fiscal year '26 through '29 have increased sufficiently for us to be able to maintain the current millage rate. So this is the scenario that staff are recommending. So we also wanted to give you a little bit more on the timeline for when property value assumptions are updated, since this is a key assumption in the forecast. So in January every year, the State Revenue Estimating Conference puts out their ad valorem assessment assumptions for each county. And then historically, we've then waited to see the forecast that Pinellas County's Office of Management and Budget puts out in April to follow suit, since we have the same revenue source. Their forecast follows the same assumptions as the state, except for they take a more conservative stance of assuming a 0.5% reduction from what the state is assuming. And these are the assumptions that we have in our forecast. And on June 1st is then when we receive the estimated taxable values from the Pinellas County Property Appraiser, and then on July 1st is when we receive the final certified taxable values. So as I said, this is the first scenario. Both forecasts are identical with the exception of the millage rate that you see in fiscal year '25. So '25 has, the scenario one has 0.8508. And then what we kind of look to is kind of call like the bottom line is the green cell up there under fiscal year '29, and that's the unassigned fund balance. And the target that we're shooting for by board policy is 8.3%. So you can see at this millage rate, it reduces unassigned fund balance from the 23% that we have currently to 12.07%. And then we could flip to the next one. And scenario two, again, the only difference is fiscal year '25 has the 0.8250 millage rate, and that further reduces our unassigned fund balance in fiscal year '29 down to 9.56%, which is closer to the 8.3% target. Okay, so then moving on to the funding parameters. In both scenarios, we've included funds for the strategic plan implementation. So in fiscal year '25, you'll see $1.125 million in the line item for new and expanded programs, and that's to complete implementation of the final year of our strategic plan. And those funds are primarily for a new site for the Quality Early Learning Initiative and expanding the Turbo Babies campaign and Children's Mental Health Initiative, all of which have been discussed at recent board meetings. And then also in that line for new and expanded program funding is an average of $3.3 million a year to fund whatever the new priorities or strategies are that are identified for the new strategic plan. And then you'll also see in the forecast there's a line for program reductions. And right now we're assuming that beginning in fiscal year '27, a potential $500,000 reduction followed by $1 million each year thereafter. And that's just to account for the probability that there could be a reduction or elimination of some programs as a result of either no longer being a strategic fit or through program monitoring efforts, or even just allocation right sizing through our lapse monitoring efforts. We've also included the board priority and direction to spend down fund balance to meet the board policy, which is to have a total of 3 months expenditures, 2 months for cash flow purposes, and 1 month for potential unforeseen expenses, which, as I said before, that target is 8.3%. So scenario 2, at this point in time, reduces fund balance from the current 23%, which is $29.5 million, to 9.56%, which is $14.6 million by fiscal year '29. In this slide, we wanted to highlight that while we're intentionally working to spend down fund balance, there are some potential challenges that we're mindful of as we do that. One being that our budget relies on fund balance as part of the total resources that we use to fund the annual budget. So specifically in fiscal year '24, it makes up 36% of our revenue sources, and the primary contributor to that fund balance is lapse. So when you look at the line in the forecast for projected surplus or loss, which we're showing on the slide, that's the difference between how much we're relying on fund balance to fund the budget, which in fiscal year '25 is $23.3 million, minus how much we project to lapse in that year, which in fiscal year '25 is $17.3 million. So we're projecting a loss, or in essence a fund balance reduction of almost $6 million, which is good. But if we continue that aggressive spend down, we could be in danger of having to make significant program reductions in the future. And that's because aside from the capital RFA, almost everything else in the budget is recurring expenditures. So it's important that we spend it down responsibly and at a pace that aligns with our lapse projections, which is why you see in this table the loss is getting smaller over time, and our spend down target is pushed out to fiscal year '29. And I know, maybe Beth, you wanted to add something, I don't know, on this slide or the next.
Yeah, I'll kind of pick it up here. The number I really look at is what's listed as projected surplus or loss. I mean, that's really the cash positive or the cash negative to where we are. And it's, it's the sum of everything that comes before. So as Diana said, in proposed 2025, we project that to be 5.9 million, and then it would begin going down in subsequent years. Where we would want to be, assuming we could project this perfectly, is we'd want to be near break even in this last year of the projection, because in that green box, that target of 8.3% of unassigned fund balance, that's the minimum number. That is to have a minimum of that third month cash flow, and so we would not want to be going under that. So if we're moving towards given that it's a 5-year projection, I count the loss of $890,000 as reasonably close to break even. We'll continue to watch it every year as we look at all of the factors that we put in. We could go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about lapse projections and sort of why they matter and how some of those things are different today than they might have been in a more stabilized environment. Lapse per se is not a horrible thing, but there are 2 ways in which it's really important to us to understand and to plan accordingly. The arena in which it is, I will say, a bad thing is on a program-by-program basis. If we fund a program, and I'll just use really simple terms, to have 100 employees that are supposed to do X, Y, Z, and they're supposed to serve 10,000 kids. If they lapse by having only 80 of those people in place, presumably they're not, one of 2 or 3 things. Either they really didn't need that number of people in the first place, which we can correct pretty easily. More likely, they're not serving the number of kids that we believed in the community needed to be served and that we contracted with them to serve. Or they're being stretched way thin and their workforce isn't doing, at least over time, won't do as good a job or as one-on-one work as they're supposed to do, or whatever, given the nature, whatever is relevant to the nature of the program. But if it took 100 employees to do what it was we contracted for, we do expect them to have, let's just say, the 100 employees. So before COVID and before the more recent difficulty in hiring people, if an agency wasn't able to keep fairly fully staffed, it really meant they weren't doing something right, because the market did in fact have enough people at the pay rates that they had to by and large stay staffed. So they needed to either be retaining their employees better or being on top of and recruiting more quickly. In several of the sectors we fund, arguably all of them, but in a few in particular, that's just not the case right now. If you take behavioral and mental health, for instance, there just aren't enough of them. There aren't enough of all of those professionals across the country, across the state of Florida, within Pinellas County, and they've had, that particular sector's had further folks peeled off from them by opportunities for mental health professionals to work remotely when they want to work, the exact hours they want to work, as little or as much as they choose. That's going to just be really hard to compete against. So, so I think we're going to see in some of these sectors increase absolute percentages of lapse. What then is incumbent upon us is to do a better job of estimating it. Because so I've said there were kind of two components of thinking about lapse. One is at the agency level and what that means or doesn't mean. The other is for JWB, what our overall lapse is or isn't. And I'd suggest it doesn't make a great deal of difference whether the lapse percentage is 10% or 13% or 15%, as long as we can reasonably well project what it's going to be. Because if we assume it's 10 and it's 14, then there's money we could have spent in that year that we thought we didn't have because we thought it was going to be spent, but instead it was lapsed. So the better we can predict lapse year in and year out, we're going to, as JWB, we're going to be better off in managing the funds we have, managing the millage we have, keeping it as low as it can be while serving the community, and or knowing that we have funds to meet an identified need that we held back on because we thought we were going to spend it. So one of the things that Diana did this year, she and Stacy had long been saying, we deal with average lapse being whatever, long ago it tended to be around 10%, and then it was moving up and it was 14 and 15%. But they would both say, it's totally different if we're dealing with a static group of programs that have been around for a while and are stable and what they lapse versus new programming where in the first year they always lapse more. They need to know they can hire XYZ positions, but the fact is there's going to be some delay in getting those positions filled, and even in year 2 you're going to see more lapse across the board, all kinds of programs you do. So what they did was look year by year at the dollar amount of programs that fell into each of those buckets. So they segmented our programs and then applied and looked at history of different lapse amounts. So they looked at programs in the 0 to 1 frame, the 1 to 2 year frame, and then those who had been in existence over 2 years. And you see at the very bottom of this large sheet how different each of those pan out. So for fiscal year 25, for instance, the more stable programs we're estimating at 13%, but year 1 programs are almost 50%, and year 2 programs are about 33%. It just takes that long to begin to actually fully implement a program and to spend all the money. Some programs are really easy to turn on and off. Most are not, and most of the programs we have are personnel-based and process-based, and it just takes a while. So that's what I would, in terms of responding to concerns about lapse, that's what I would tell you that we are really working on. We're also working internally, and Diana really put a lot of effort into this, of working with all of the administrative costs and the dollars that we were lapsing. Some of those are programmatic in nature. So the Family Service Initiative, for instance, is managed by JWB folks, not an outside agency, but it is program in nature. Or things like Turbo Babies, or the campaigns are in that bucket. But it's also true across all of our departments. And some of them are smaller amounts, you know, $10,000 here, $20,000 there, but it does add up. Things that departments were and units were lapsing every year. You know, they'd say, oh, I want to send 4 people to a conference, so there's the conference to travel, blah, blah, blah. But never in the history of that unit had all 4 people been able to go, for instance. So I don't know what the dollar amount that we saw from that, but it added up to something. So we knew we were part of the lapse percentage, and we wanted to do a better job on our side as well. Pass it back. All right, either questions or Diane?
We've got one more slide.
Yep.
So now just walking through the rest of the funding parameters for fiscal year 25, what we're recommending is a 3.7% cost of living adjustment, or a COLA, for both JWB personnel and eligible programs. And this recommendation is based on the most recently released CPI rate for the Tampa Bay region, which was 3.7% as of March 2024. We're also recommending the addition of 6 new positions at JWB in fiscal year 25, and then 2 additional positions each year thereafter to help support the new and expanded programs. And the admin rate, which you can see in the forecast with these assumptions, is still well within the board guidelines of under 10%. And then also built into the line for program continuation, we've included $2.8 million for the expansion enhancement requests that were just brought to the board earlier this month. And then we also increased the capital RFA funding for fiscal year 25 to $3 million. If you're looking at the forecast, it doesn't look like much of an increase because fiscal year 24 shows $2.9 million, but that was really for 2 years of funding that we combined due to the ARPA funding that was available. So we're recommending this increase for fiscal year 25 because, I mean, one, we see this as a responsible way to help spend down fund balance because it's non-recurring expenditures, and then also because with increased costs and continued need of our agencies, we believe this to be a good investment. And then I'll just, Beth already touched on the last bullet point there, that we did look line by line throughout the whole budget to find what we could see as cuts, not as service cuts, but getting rid of any additional contingencies, because we do have the 1 month of unassigned fund balance for potential unforeseen expenses. So we realized we don't need line items like the contingency that we had budgeted at $500,000. So that's why you'll see starting at fiscal year 25, we're not recommending to continue that anymore. We also implemented a 2.5% contra for salary and fringe benefits because we're never staffed at 100% all of the time. So some of those things are built into what you see for FY25. And that's it.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you could, you are asking for 6 positions for 2024, and then it goes down to 2. Are you undercutting yourself?
I'll let Beth speak to that.
I get that one. Maybe. We're 3 of those positions are across what we call the 3-legged stool, those those units that work directly with programs. And we've just continued to be behind. As we added programs, these are the folks who handle all the reimbursements and budgets for programs, and all the financial monitoring, and then second are the program monitoring and contract administrators, and then third is evaluation. So we're hoping we will get to a point where we, one, catch up, and we're also hoping to do some effort at re-looking at the depth to which we monitor every single agency, almost every single year. So, but that'll take work to get there, and it will take some time for that to pay off. The two of them are related to our campaigns. We're too successful in a way for our own good with both Turbo Babies and Sleep Baby Safely. Sleep Baby Safely's now gone across the state in 19 counties? 17 counties. And while it's somebody in those counties' responsibilities to launch the campaign, we're still being brought in some to kind of train the trainer, and we want to assure that the fidelity to the model is held up. Besides the fact that it is a campaign that has to, just like Turbo Babies, has to be done on a constant basis. 7,500 new babies are born every year. You've got to be educating folks every year about safe sleep. And we've just found, for instance, we were pulling down too much of April's time, for instance, in doing things that somebody else really could be doing, so that we could concentrate on the effect of those campaigns better and free April to do the best work that she does for us and for the whole community. And then the last position, and again, this would not be a recurring later on, is by statute, there is a community alliance that has specific representation from the county, from the Children's Service Council, if there is one, from the court system, from a variety of folks, in order to provide a community perspective on the child welfare system and on the prevention system. And historically in Pinellas County, the person in my position has been chairing that group. Until Eckerd left, I'm not sure there was much of anything that group was going to be able to do because they didn't really collaborate with anybody. The new agency does, and what several other communities have done is have a full-time person focused on that effort. And so that's one of these positions. They would live at JWB, they would report to Karen Bogus and to me, but would help in a variety of ways connect the dots, particularly on the prevention side, which is where we live. We've got to, as JWB, we've got to stay away from the deep end child welfare side. But we have a lot of resources in Pinellas County, but as I know, Judge, we don't always know how to connect to them, and that would be a good part of the effort. So having said that, some of these are, I say one time, that one, for instance, is definitely a one-time increase. I'm hoping we can find some other ways to be more efficient in some ways so that in the out years, we won't need to add as many people to do as much as we want to do. That may be optimistic on my part, and we may be coming back looking for more than we're forecasting here.
Any other comments or questions? I do have one additional component, something I wanted to bring up. I felt that the presentation on the lapse was extremely helpful to me. Did everyone else feel that same way? Then I would recommend that we include that in the board presentation, because I think specifically for the new board members who don't or haven't had the opportunity to really understand or see anything about the lapse, that would be a good piece of education. And I think also for those of us who have been around for a long time, really didn't understand it either. So I would recommend that be part of it, if everybody's in agreement on. Good. All right, then, hearing no more questions in the area, the Chief Executive Officer's report.
Well, I just saw you all last week, so there's not a lot more. I'll just share on a semi-personal note. Becca Teeter and I visited Maddie Williams Neighborhood Family Center yesterday, along with Senator Ed Hooper. They are in the midst of, or on the verge of, I guess I should say, a construction project to add space. It's in a couple of phases. They are enjoying the delight of trying to get all of their permits from various and sundry governmental agencies. So they don't really know exactly when they will start. They thought it would have been by now. And I enjoyed, my son volunteers there and my grandson goes aftercare there. So I got to hear, and this was not a surprise, how wonderful my son was and what a young man full of energy. And a handful, I said, and they went, oh, yes. My very bright but very headstrong grandson is, so. But otherwise, we're all looking forward to tomorrow, and thank you all very much for sponsoring tables and bringing your guests. It's going to be a who's who, very largely because of all of you, so thanks.
Do we have any public comments? Seeing no public comments, do we have any other motions or questions to be brought to the committee? Hearing none, meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.